They say every legend has a final scene, but no one ever tells you when it's about to happen. Not until the camera is already rolling and the sun is setting for the last time. The set was quiet in a way that didn't feel like Hollywood. No blaring horns in the street, no echo of distant traffic. Just the crunch of boots on dry earth and the faint creak of an old wooden sign swaying in the wind. Somewhere, a loose shutter knocked against a wall, the sound thin and hollow. It was a kind of silence that didn't just fill the air, it pressed into the skin. Clint Eastwood sat in his chair, a director's chair older than half the crew. His name was stitched on the back in faded white letters, the fabric worn thin at the edges. He wasn't leaning back. He sat forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on a point far beyond the clapboard buildings of the set. 93 years, 39 films as a director, over 70 as an actor, and yet, in that moment, the only thing he seemed to see was something none of them could. A young production assistant, barely in his 20s, tiptoed past with a bundle of cables in his arms. He stole a glance at Clint, then quickly looked away. Even now, the man radiated the kind of quiet authority that made people straighten their backs. But there was something else in his posture today, something heavier. The wind shifted. It carried the dry scent of the California hills. But in Clint's mind, it wasn't California anymore. It was Spain, 1965. The dust was redder there, the sun hotter. He was 20-something again, boots planted in the middle of an empty street, in a town built only for the camera's eye. Sweat rolled down his back under a thick poncho, the revolver heavy at his side. Sergio Leone's voice rang out from somewhere behind the camera, sharp and excited. That day, his hands had been steady, steadier than his heartbeat. Mr. Eastwood? The voice pulled him back. A crew member stood a few feet away, holding the day's call sheet. "We're ready for you." He nodded, slow, as if testing the weight of the moment. Then he rose from the chair, each movement deliberate. His boots sank slightly into the dust as he crossed toward the set center, the wood of the saloon doors groaning when he pushed them open. From behind a monitor, the director, a man young enough to be Clint's grandson, watched closely like he was afraid to miss something. Quiet on set. The world seemed to hold its breath. And action! Clint stepped into the frame. The light caught his face in a way no cinematographer could have planned. The deep lines like riverbeds carved by time, the eyes still sharp, still dangerous. Each step felt like it belonged in another movie, another decade, maybe another life. The scene wasn't about gunfights or grit. It was about a man leaving, walking away. And though the crew only saw an actor hitting his mark, Clint knew this was no scene. This was goodbye. They say a man never forgets his first time drawing a gun, even if the bullets are made of smoke and the street isn't real. For Clint Eastwood, that street had no name, no history, no life. It was a ghost town built from plywood and paint. But when the cameras rolled, it might as well have been the center of the universe. Spain, 1965. The air was hot enough to make the horizon shimmer. Cicadas hummed from somewhere beyond the hills, and the faint tang of gunpowder from the armorer's tent mixed with the smell of dust and horse sweat. The set had been built in just 21 days. A saloon with swinging doors, a barber shop with an empty chair, a general store whose shelves were nailed in place and never stopped. From the front, it looked like a real town. Step behind the facades, and you'd see nothing but thin planks propped up by scaffolding. But that was the magic. It didn't have to be real, only look real. Clint was the newcomer here, not a rookie actor, but an outsider in a world dominated by quick draws and slower dialogue. His name meant little in Europe, and even in the States he was still that guy from TV. The producers weren't sure he could carry a movie. They said his face was too still, his voice too low. But Sergio Leone, eyes hidden under the brim of his hat, a cigar clenched in his teeth, had seen something the others hadn't. He doesn't need words. Leone had told the crew in Italian. His silence says everything. A prop man walked up, the revolver cradled in both hands. It was heavier than Clint expected. Cold in the morning air. The grip was worn smooth by years of use, or perhaps just by the prop department's careful distressing. "You'll get used to it," the man said in broken English, his accent curling around the words. Clint gave a small nod. He wasn't much for chatter, even then. Somewhere down the street, an extra in a black duster stood waiting, hand hovering near his holster. His job was simple. Stare him down until the moment felt unbearable. Places. The voice of the assistant director cracked through the stillness, and the set shifted into position like a machine clicking into gear. Extras moved into the shade of doorways. The fake bartender polished an empty glass. A boy crouched with a dog near the well. Overhead, the sun climbed, bright enough to bleach the colors from the wooden storefronts. The heat pressed against Clint's skin, making the fabric of the poncho cling to his back. He stepped out from behind the saloon sidewall. His boots crunched on the dirt. For a split second, he forgot about the script, the cameras, the crew. The moment felt real, the street, the stare, the tension. Somewhere behind the camera, Leone watched through the viewfinder, unmoving, unblinking. And Azione, the single word snapped like a whip. Clint's eyes narrowed under the brim of his hat. His left hand hovered near the poncho's edge, his right hanging loose but ready. He took one step forward, then another. The distance between him and the man in black felt like a mile, though it was no more than 30 paces. From the sidelines, Leone's voice came again, low but sharp. Slower, make them wait. So he did. Each step became its own story. The wind kicked up a curl of dust that swirled between them before fading into the heat. A horse snorted somewhere off camera. The man in black shifted his weight, just enough to make the leather of his holster creak. In the corner of Clint's vision, a tumbleweed rolled lazily across the street. He didn't know if it was a lucky accident or a stagehand's perfect timing. But it didn't matter. The moment belonged to him now. Every breath, every blink, every muscle in his face was telling the same thing. I am ready, but I am in no hurry. And that's when Clint Eastwood learned one of the rules that would carry him through the next 7 decades of his career. In film, as in life, suspense is worth more than speed. But just as he reached the center of the street, just as his hand began to curl toward the revolver's grip, Leone's voice cut through the air. Cut! The moment shattered. Crew members exhaled. Extras broke character. The boy with the dog started laughing. Clint didn't move right away. His eyes stayed locked on the man in black, as if some invisible thread still held them in the duel. The first take was over. But deep inside, Clint knew something had begun. They say the past never really leaves you. It just waits in the dust, in the silence, until something stirs it back to life. For Clint Eastwood, it took only a few grains of wind-blown dirt to bring 1965 rushing into 2025. The sun was higher now, but softer, that golden hour sweet spot directors worship. The modern set was bigger than anything from the old days. Towering rigs for lights, rows of digital cameras on cranes, a village of trailers behind the soundstage. And yet, Clint could feel the same dryness in the air, the same grit at the back of his throat. The poncho was gone, replaced by a weathered overcoat for the role. But the weight on his shoulders, that felt familiar. He stood in position, eyes half closed against the light. Around him, the crew moved like clockwork, grips adjusting the dolly track. The sound team crouched over their boom mics, costumers making tiny, invisible fixes to his collar. The assistant director called for quiet, but it was already quiet. Not the normal kind, not just the absence of chatter, but the heavy, waiting kind, the kind he remembered from that street in Spain. Somewhere deep in his mind, the two worlds began to blur. He could hear Leone's voice again, slower, make them wait. And though this was a different set, a different crew, a different century, the rhythm was the same. The camera wasn't just pointed at him. It was leaning in. A young actor stood across from him, barely 30, eyes locked on Clint's. In the script, the young man's character was supposed to challenge him, to push him toward a confrontation that would end in violence. But in this moment, Clint saw more than an actor. He saw himself, tall, untested, with something to prove. And just like that, the decades between them fell away. Mr. Eastwood, whenever you're ready, the director said softly, almost reverently. Clint gave a single nod. His boots shifted against the dirt, a slow, deliberate scrape that the microphones would catch. He took one step forward. The overcoat brushed his legs, heavy with dust. His hand hovered near the holster, not for a gun this time, but for the weight of a choice. The young actor's jaw tightened. Clint could see the nerves behind the confidence. He recognized it. He'd worn the same mask once. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the street in Spain flared up again. The man in black, the swirling dust, the heat on his skin. He took another step, then another. The air seemed to thicken between them. From behind the monitor, the director raised a hand, the universal sign to hold, to stretch the tension. Clint understood. He'd invented that trick long before half the crew was born. He held the young actor's gaze, letting the silence expand until it became a living thing. And then, just when it felt like something would break, cut! The spell shattered. The young actor exhaled sharply, almost stumbling back. Crew members relaxed. Someone laughed too loud. A phone rang somewhere beyond the set. But Clint stayed still, eyes still locked where the young man had been. Because in that fraction of a second before the director's call, Clint had felt it. The same pulse, the same fire. As if the street from 1965 had never ended, had only widened to meet him here. They say acting is about becoming someone else. But directing? That's about carrying everyone. And Clint Eastwood had learned that once you sit in the director's chair, you never really get out of it. Not even 30 years later. The present day set faded in his mind, replaced by the pale, washed-out light of a small town built in the Canadian foothills. 1992. The air was cold enough that the breath of the actors rose in clouds, curling away into the early morning fog. The film was Unforgiven, the project he had waited years to make. The one they told him was too grim, too slow, too uncommercial. But Clint knew better. He always had. He stood in the muddy Main Street, the brim of his hat dripping from a mist. Around him, the crew huddled in heavy coats, gloves wrapped around coffee cups. Behind the monitor, a younger Clint leaned forward, eyes locked on the scene unfolding. Gene Hackman in his sheriff's coat, Morgan Freeman at his side, both men inhabiting the weight of their roles like second skins. The camera tracked them slowly, the lens breathing in the silence before the storm. Clint wasn't just watching, he was listening. To the horses shifting their hooves, to the wind sighing against the false front of the buildings, to the silence that was more dangerous than any gunshot. He knew how to make that silence work. It was the same lesson he'd learned in Spain. Suspense is currency and patience is power. The scene ended, and instead of barking instructions, he walked to the actors quietly, speaking just loud enough for them to hear. "Let it burn a little longer," he said. "Make them feel like something's about to break, even if it never does." They nodded. They understood. That was the Eastwood way. Not louder, not faster, but sharper. When the cameras rolled again, the difference was electric. The tension wasn't in the lines or the movements. It was in the air itself. And Clint, sitting back in the folding chair with his name on it, allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Unforgiven wasn't just a movie. It was a statement. A line in the sand, saying, "This is who I am, and I'm not here to play by your rules." The cold air snapped him back to the present. Only it wasn't cold now. The California sun beat down on the modern set, and Clint was once again standing in the middle of the street, though this one had more LED panels and horses. The young director approached, tablet in hand, eyes shining with the same mix of nerves and respect Clint had once seen in Hackman, Freeman, even Leone himself. "Mr. Eastwood, what do you think?" he asked, showing the playback of the last take. Clint studied the screen for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Finally, he looked up, squinting against the sun. "Hold it longer," he said simply. "Let it burn." The young director nodded, as if he'd been handed a secret worth keeping. And Clint, stepping back into position, realized that the street he was standing on, this street in this film, wasn't so different from the others he'd walked. They all led to the same place. But before the next take could roll, before the cameras could capture whatever came next, something, or rather, someone, appeared at the edge of the set, someone Clint hadn't seen in decades. They say the past walks beside you. Most days you don't notice. But every once in a while, it steps right in front of you. Clint had been adjusting his stance for the next take when he noticed a figure at the far edge of the set. At first, The man was just a silhouette against the glaring California sun. Tall, lean, the kind of posture that came from years of hard living. Crew members moved around him without much notice, but Clint's eyes stayed locked. There was something in the way the man stood, something that reached back through decades of memory. It wasn't until the man took a few steps closer that Clint felt the ground shift beneath him. The hat, the boots, the slow, deliberate gait. It was like watching a ghost walk out of a reel of film. Eli. The name slipped from Clint's lips before he realized he'd said it aloud. Eli Parker, the stuntman who'd taken the fall in Clint's very first Western duel. The man who'd hit the dirt so hard the crew thought he'd broken something. Back in '65, they'd shared whiskey in a cramped trailer and talked about the kind of men they'd never become. But as the years rolled on, Clint went on to build his legend, and Eli vanished into the cracks of Hollywood. Now, decades later, here he was, older, rougher, the sun carving deep lines into his face. The leather of his jacket was cracked, his hat sweat-stained, but his eyes hadn't changed. They still held that same unshakable mischief, as if the world was a poker game and he was holding the winning hand. "Thought you might have forgotten me," Eli said, voice low, gravelly. Clint shook his head slowly. Not a chance. The crew had gone quiet now, sensing something unspoken between the two men. Even the young director hung back, giving them space. Clint stepped down from the mark, closing the distance. "What happened to you?" Clint asked. Eli gave a half-smile. "Hollywood happened. You keep making movies. And I kept hitting the ground for other men's close-ups. Until one day, there weren't any calls left to answer. A silence settled between them. Heavy, but not awkward. The kind of silence that carried history in its pockets. Clint remembered the countless nameless faces who'd stood in for someone else's glory. Men like Eli, who bled for the shot but never got their name in lights. "You're still standing," Clint said finally. "Yeah," Eli replied. "And so are you. But for how much longer?" The words hung there, more loaded than any six-shooter. Clint didn't flinch, but something deep inside shifted. He thought of the first scene they'd ever done together. That slow walk into the duel, the dust curling around their boots, the air tight with unspoken threat. It had all been pretend. But life didn't cut when it hurt. Eli stepped back, tilting his head toward the set. "Finish your scene, old friend. I'll be watching." Clint wanted to say something more, to ask where Eli had been all these years, what had brought him here now. But the AD's voice cut through the air. Quiet on set. And action. The moment was gone. Clint turned back toward the camera, the weight of Eli's words still pressing on his shoulders. Somewhere beyond the glare of the lights, Eli disappeared into the shadows of the set. Like a memory you're not ready to lose, but can't hold on to forever. They say the camera never lies. But sometimes it catches a truth no one planned for. Clint stood on his mark, the overcoat heavy on his shoulders, the dust clinging to his boots. The young actor across from him was ready, hand hovering near his hip, eyes steady. The crew had reset everything. The lighting rigs, the dolly track, the extras in their places. But Clint's mind wasn't in this set anymore. It was out there, just beyond the lights, where Eli had disappeared a minute earlier. The AD's voice cut through the still air. "Pictures up, roll camera." The faint where the digital rig began, so clean compared to hum of the old film reels. The director leaned in toward the monitor. And action. Clint took his first step forward, but it wasn't the character moving. It was him, the man, the decades, the weight of every street he'd ever walked, from the plywood towns of Spain to the mud-soaked roads of Canada, now to this California backlit. His eyes locked on the young actors, but behind them he saw Eli's, saw that glint, that challenge. Another step. The sound of his boots was louder in his ears than any dialogue. He could hear the faint creak of the leather holster, the shift of his coat in the breeze. And then the past bled through. The hot, metallic scent of a revolver from 1965. The muffled cough of an old Aeroflex camera. The dry taste of dust at the back of his throat. The young actor delivered his line, sharp, rehearsed. But Clint didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the silence grow. He could feel the crew holding their breath, the young director's eyes flicking to the script supervisor in confusion. This wasn't how they'd rehearsed it. He stepped closer, his gaze never breaking. "You think you got all the time in the world," Clint said, a line that wasn't in the script. His voice was low, gravelly, and something about it made the young actor's confidence falter for just a second. That second was all Clint needed. He took another step, and in that movement, he wasn't acting anymore. He was talking to Eli, to the crew, to himself. One day, someone calls cut, and that's it. No more takes. You'd better be ready before they do. The young actor swallowed hard, his own instincts kicking in. He improvised back, eyes narrowing, matching Clint's intensity. The camera caught every flicker of emotion, the push, the pull, the unspoken weight between two men in a moment that neither could fake. From somewhere behind the monitor, the director was frozen, watching something better than he'd imagined. He didn't dare interrupt. Clint's hand moved toward the holster. Slow, deliberate. A gust of wind rolled down the street, curling dust around his boots like it had in Spain all those years ago. For a heartbeat, the two timelines merged. Young Clint, the rising gunslinger. Old Clint, the man who'd outlived most of the names in the credits. And standing just outside the frame, in Clint's mind, Eli watched. Then, cut. The words sliced through the tension like a blade. But no one moved. The crew stayed frozen for a moment longer, as if afraid the spell would break completely. Finally, the young actor exhaled, his shoulders dropping. The director stood, pulling off his headset. "That," he said slowly, "wasn't in the script." Clint shrugged. "Neither is life." He stepped away from the mark, brushing dust from his coat. His eyes scanned the edge of the set where Eli had been, but the spot was empty. No hat, no boots, no shadow. Just sunlight and plywood. Somewhere deep in his chest, Clint felt a flicker, not of loss, but of warning, because the street they were standing on was running out of road. They say, you know when you've reached the end of the road. It's not the view that tells you, it's the weight in your legs. Clint sat alone in his trailer, the thin hum of the air conditioner barely holding back the California heat. The script lay open on the small table in front of him, but his eyes weren't on the words. They were on his hands. The same hands that had drawn 100 guns, signed 1,000 autographs, held the faces of people he'd loved and buried. The knuckles were knotted now, the skin marked with a map of years. He flexed them slowly, as if making sure they still belonged to him. Outside, the muffled clatter of the crew echoed to the thin walls. Carts rolling, cables dragged across the dirt, voices calling out times and setups. It was a sound he'd known for most of his life. But today it felt different. Fainter. Like hearing a song you know will fade before the chorus. He reached for the coffee on the counter, only to stop halfway. In his mind, the cup wasn't there. Instead, his fingers curled around the grip of a revolver. The one from 65. The one from that first street in Spain. A breath later, the image was gone, replaced by the plain ceramic mug. He sipped, tasting not coffee, but the dry heat of the desert. A knock on the trailer door pulled him back. The young director stepped inside, tentative. "They're ready for you, Mr. Eastwood," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. Clint nodded, standing slowly. His knees complained in a language only age could speak. But he straightened anyway. He'd done it 1,000 times before. One more wouldn't kill him. The walk to the set was longer than it looked. Crew members stepped aside as he passed, some nodding respectfully, others just watching in silence. It wasn't the kind of silence you give a star. It was the kind you give a man you know you may not see on set again. When he reached the mark, the street was empty but for him and the young actor. The overcast light painted everything in muted tones. No harsh sun, no deep shadows, just a soft, even glow. It was the kind of light cinematographers prayed for, and Clint knew it wouldn't last. The young actor adjusted his stance, clearly nervous. Clint caught his eye and gave the faintest of nods. "You've got to own the silence," he said quietly. "It's the only thing they can't write for you." The young man nodded back, gripping the prop at his side. The AD called for quiet. The crew froze. The director's voice was calm but tight with anticipation. And action. Clint moved, slow and deliberate. His coat swayed just enough to suggest weight without rush. His boots pressed into the dirt, each step leaving a print deeper than the last. He wasn't thinking about the line he had to say. He was thinking about every road that had led here. Spain, the Canadian foothills, the sets that had burned in the sun, the friends who had never made it past the last take. Halfway to his mark, he felt it. The same pull he'd felt in 65, the same awareness that the camera wasn't just watching, it was remembering. The lens seemed to lean closer, as if trying to memorize the way his shoulders carried the years. And then, just before he reached the spot where the scene would turn, just before the words would come, "Hold for light," someone called from behind the camera. The moment froze. Crew members scrambled to adjust reflectors, tweak angles. Clint stayed where he was, caught between two worlds, the one in front of the camera and the one that was slowly fading behind him. In that pause, he looked past the set, past the lights, past the crew, searching for Eli. But the street was empty. And for the first time in his life, Clint Eastwood wondered if maybe this really was the last road he'd walk. They say, you don't know the last time until it's already behind you. But Clint Eastwood knew. He could feel it in the way the light fell on the street, in the way the crew watched him like they were trying to memorize the moment. The street was ready. The young actor was in place. The crew held their breath, waiting for the final take of the day, maybe of Clint's life on a set. The light had shifted to that perfect golden burn, the kind that only lasts minutes before slipping away forever. Even the wind seemed to know, moving just enough to stir the dust without breaking the stillness. Clint took his mark. The weight of the coat felt heavier now, but it was the kind of weight he'd carried before, the weight of an ending. The director leaned toward the monitor. And action. The first step was slow, steady. The camera followed, gliding with him as if afraid to lose the rhythm. Each movement was deliberate, a living echo of every role he'd ever played. The second step came with a faint shift in the coat, the dust curling around his boots like old friends welcoming him home. Halfway down the street, the air thickened, not from heat, but from memory. He could see them all now, walking beside him in flashes. Sergio Leone with a cigar in his teeth, Gene Hackman in the cold morning fog, Morgan Freeman's knowing smile. Crews he'd worked with for decades, faces that had aged, faces that had vanished. And then, between them all, Eli. The stuntman wasn't in the shadows this time. He stood clear in the light, leaning against a saloon post, hat low over his eyes, watching. No one else seemed to see him. But Clint didn't care. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, and Eli's nod was small but certain. A goodbye, maybe a thank you. Then he was gone. Clint reached the center of the street. The young actor's hand hovered near his prop, eyes locked, tension building. The line was in the script, but Clint didn't say it right away. He let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable, the way he'd been taught, the way he'd taught others. Somewhere behind the camera, the director didn't dare interrupt. Finally, he spoke. You hold on to every frame, because you never know which one's the last. It wasn't the line they'd written, but it was the one that belonged here. The young actor answered, instinct guiding him. The words barely mattered. It was the way they stood there, two men on opposite ends of the same road. That told the story. Clint's gaze didn't waver until the moment was right, and then, just as the dust swirled in a perfect halo around him, he took the last step forward. Cut! The call rang out, but no one moved. The crew stayed frozen, as if afraid the world might start again and erase the moment. The director lowered his headset slowly, his eyes shining in a way he didn't bother to hide. Clint turned away from the camera, walking toward the edge of the set. The street stretched behind him, empty now. At the far end, the sun was dipping low, spilling gold and crimson across the sky. He paused, feeling the warmth on his back. The same sun that had risen on his first day in Spain was now setting on his last. He reached the end of the street, where the plywood gave way to gravel and asphalt. Beyond that was nothing but the real world, unlit, unframed. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The set, the films, the years, they'd follow him wherever he went. Somewhere in the distance, a voice called after him, but he kept walking. Each step was lighter, than the one before. The dust settled, the light thinned, and when he finally disappeared from view, it was as if the scene had closed itself. On the monitor, the last frame lingered. Clint Eastwood, walking away into the glow of a dying sun. The crew watched in silence. No one said out loud, but they all knew that was the last take. Asterisk, some stories you only hear once, and when they're gone, they don't come back. If you felt this one, if you walked this road with us, there are more roads ahead, more voices in the shadows, more truths left untold. Subscribe to Silent Stories, and let's keep walking together before the last take fades to black. Asterisk,